Hi guys, here's a dramatic secret revealed about Diane's tension with Jack regarding his appearance. Diane sets conditions for forgiveness. She may not be able to accept the ugly truth about Jack, the man she once risked her life to save, but in return, she faces a harsh reality. Jack continues to beg Diane for forgiveness, explaining in detail how he was drugged and his remorse. Diane, after carefully considering her past mistakes, agrees to consider forgiveness but sets strict conditions, including Jack's commitment to counseling the couple and maintaining complete distance from Patty. Diane never imagined that one day she would be forced to stand in front of a truth so brutal that even the strongest part of her would begin to shake. Some pain does not arrive like that in a direct blow. It arrives as a scene that is too clear, too exposed, too impossible to explain away. The image of Jack in bed with Patty on a yacht was not only a shock in the emotional sense. It was a cold blade cutting straight through Diane's pride, her memories, and everything she had tried to rebuild after years of living under suspicion, paying for mistakes, and trying to redeem herself. She had made mistakes before. She knew that better than anyone. She had made selfish choices, crossed lines, and created damage that later forced her to gather broken pieces of her own dignity and try to stitch them back together. But that was exactly why Diane understood better than most people what it cost to keep a love alive after it had already been shattered once. She understood how much patience, restraint, and inner sacrifice it took to believe that a person could change. And what hurt her most was not simply the image of betrayal in front of her eyes. It was the feeling that she may have placed her whole life inside the wrong kind of faith. Jack stood before her no longer like the steady, composed man who always tried to act as though he could keep the Abbott family standing through any storm. After what happened on the yacht, all that remained in him was the panic of a man who had realized he had lost the right to be trusted in the very moment when he should have been the one needing rescue. He begged Diane for forgiveness, not with the confidence of someone who believed a few explanation would smooth over the wound, but with desperation so raw it almost stripped him bare. Jack tried to explain every fragment of what happened as if, by being patient enough, honest enough, and broken enough, he could make Diane see what he needed her to see. A man pushed into a horrifying situation, drugged, manipulated, while he was not in his right mind and now living with disgust toward himself. For Jack, the most horrifying part was not only that Patty had taken advantage of him, but that he could not erase from his mind the image of Diane seeing everything with her own eyes. What happened on that yacht could be described as the result of sedation, manipulation, and a trap set with cruel precision. But for Diane, what remained in the end was still the image of two bodies in the same bed, the exposed ugliness of betrayal, the crushing force of reality hitting the most fragile part of a marriage that had never been built on perfectly clean ground to begin with. Jack spoke about being drugged with all the shame he could carry. He did not try to escape the emotional responsibility of what Diane had suffered. He did not try to deny how sickening the whole thing looked. In fact, that deep remorse made him more pitiful, but also made the situation even more painful. Because if Jack had been completely cold, completely selfish, completely rotten, Diane might have found it easier to turn her back on him. What trapped her was this. She could see that his regret was real, that his panic was real, that his own pain was real. But that did not make her humiliation any less real. It did not erase the feeling that her heart had just been torn open in front of the man she had protected more than once. It did not silence the question that frightened her the most. If everything on that yacht happened because of the drugs, then what in this marriage was actually strong enough to survive when darkness arrived? Diane listened in silence, and that silence was more frightening than any outburst could have been. Because in silence, a person is no longer reacting on instinct. In silence, they are confronting the deepest layer of a wound. She was no longer simply a wife furious because her husband had been caught with another woman. She was Diane, a woman who had walked through the stained rugs of her own past and had been judged, doubted, and forced to live as if she constantly had to prove that she deserved to remain in other people's lives. In that quiet moment while Jack pleaded with her, Diane was not only looking at the man in front of her. She was looking back at the woman she used to be. She was remembering the times when she had failed and still longed for the world to give her one more chance. She was remembering the ache of wanting someone to believe that a person is more than the sum of their worst mistakes. And that was what made the battle inside her so cruel. Because if she was the one who understood the complexity of guilt more than anyone else, why could she not soften now? But if she softened too quickly, would she be betraying her own pain? To be honest, this is the kind of storyline that leaves me emotionally tired in a very classic Y&R way. But I still cannot look away, because it refuses to give the audience an easy side to choose. I can ache for Diane because of the humiliation she has to swallow, and at the same time, I can still feel for Jack in the desperation of the man who knows he was trapped, but also knows that does not erase the damage. And maybe that uncomfortable middle ground is exactly what gives this storyline its weight. In a case like this, forgiveness is no longer something beautiful and pure. It is a dangerous decision. And love, if it is still there at all, no longer appears in sweet promises. It appears in whether two people can bear to keep walking through a memory this ugly without collapsing under it. That is what makes me uneasy, sad, and still curious enough to keep watching. Because the real question is not whether they still love each other. It is whether that love can survive the cost of staying alive.